General Thrax leaned back in his command chair, his eyes narrowing as he gazed at the holographic projection of Earth. It was a world brimming with life, dense with swirling storms and vast, jagged terrains. To the Xylari, it was a death world, a realm of chaotic weather, volatile species, and environments hostile to advanced life. A quaint backwater, primitive and wild, unworthy of true concern. Yet, its resources were ripe for extraction, and Thrax had been ordered to study the planet, assess its defenses, and determine its potential for conquest. To him, it was a simple task, almost beneath his rank. The humans, he scoffed, a barely evolved species, barely past combustion engines and projectile weapons. And these are the creatures we're to fear. Beside him stood Lieutenant Zorak, a younger officer with rigid posture and a stern, expressionless face. Zorak had recently led a team of scouts to Earth's surface. Their mission, to gather intelligence on human technology. Zorak seemed unbothered, almost dismissive, as he relayed the report to his general. We encountered what they call military bases, General. Not even shielded. Most of their weaponry relies on rudimentary combustion or chemical propulsion. Nothing advanced enough to pierce our defenses. Thrax raised a brow, smirking. These humans waste time with such relics. Tell me, Zorak, did you see anything that suggests they might be a threat to the Xylari? Not in the slightest, Zorak replied. They seem to rely on brute force and crude tactics. Whatever intelligence they possess, it's certainly not focused on warfare. Amused, Thrax waved a hand dismissively. Typical Death World brutes, clinging to whatever weapons they've managed to cobble together. We'll survey their resources, and if need be, clear them out. He glanced around the command center, aware of the other officers listening intently. Their species had conquered countless worlds, subduing lesser civilizations with ease. Why should this Earth be any different? Perhaps I should see for myself, Thrax murmured, pondering a direct visit. He tapped a finger on his chin thoughtfully. The reports hardly do justice to their apparent savagery. And I'm curious, what exactly do these primitive creatures think they can do with such archaic armaments? Zorak's eyes glinted with anticipation. General, if I may suggest, there's an abandoned human military base within range. It appears deserted, yet it holds a collection of their weaponry. A first-hand examination might amuse you. Thrax nodded, intrigued. Very well. Assemble a small team, Lieutenant. Let's give these humans the courtesy of an in-person visit. Moments later, Thrax and his team disembarked from their ship, stepping onto the dusty, barren grounds of the military base. The structures loomed like ancient relics, their metal corroded and paint peeling. The Xylari soldiers scanned the area with a mix of disdain and curiosity. Here and there, old artillery and missile systems lay scattered, rusted from years of disuse. These are their defenses? Thrax muttered, unable to contain his disbelief. How quaint. He motioned to a nearby missile, its metal gleaming dully in the sunlight. Zorak, tell me, how does this relic function? Zorak approached the missile, pointing to various components with a faint sneer. Crude propulsion, General. Chemical combustion to launch, no warp capacity, no intelligent guidance. It's designed to explode on impact. Nothing more. He laughed softly. They're little more than metal tubes filled with volatile compounds. Thrax chuckled, almost pitying these earthlings and their archaic machines. It's a wonder they survive on this chaotic world at all. I imagine the planet itself is as much a threat to them as they are to each other. But as Zorak brushed his hand against the missile's side, his movement triggered an old, half-forgotten mechanism. The missile gave a soft, mechanical click, followed by a faint hum. A single red light blinked to life. Lieutenant, what did you do? Thrax asked, the amusement fading from his face. It must have activated by touch, Zorak stammered, backing away. The missile's hum grew louder, its tip glowing ominously. With a sudden, deafening roar, the missile's propellant ignited, and the weapon launched straight into the sky. Thrax and his soldiers watched in shock as it arced upward before crashing into a nearby hillside with a violent explosion. scattering debris and sending a shock wave through the ground. For a brief moment, there was only silence, broken only by the distant echo of the explosion. Thrax blinked, stunned. The power contained in that single missile was unexpected, even unsettling. Primitive, yes, he murmured, his voice barely audible. But powerful, lethal, even... Zorak looked at the general, a mixture of confusion and unease in his eyes. General, is it possible we misjudged them? Thrax forced a chuckle, though his thoughts churned with doubt. Hardly. They're still primitive. This is merely a crude weapon of destruction, nothing compared to our technology. But even as he spoke, he couldn't shake the sight of that missile, the raw, untamed energy it unleashed. He'd seen advanced weaponry, even wielded it himself, but there was something about the violent simplicity of human arms that unsettled him. Let's return to the ship, he ordered, his voice firmer than he felt. There's much more to investigate here, but we won't waste time marveling at their toys. We'll assess their remaining defenses and finish our mission. We are the Xylari, after all, conquerors of worlds. This death world is no different. But as they walked back to their ship, Thrax couldn't ignore the creeping sense of disquiet within him. Primitive or not, humans had harnessed a power that demanded caution, and in the back of his mind a single unsettling thought lingered. What other toys might these Deathworlders be hiding? The days that followed the team's return from Earth grew tense. General Thrax paced the bridge of his ship, his thoughts weighed down by a series of unsettling reports. At first, he dismissed them as exaggerations from inexperienced soldiers. But as the incidents grew in frequency and severity, even Thrax could no longer ignore the troubling pattern. The initial report came from a small reconnaissance unit assigned to observe human movements. The team had been well equipped with cloaking devices and positioned at a safe distance, or so they thought. They were meant to be undetectable, invisible specters on the edge of human awareness. But they never returned. Their last transmission crackled with static, cutting off abruptly in a flurry of frantic voices, leaving only chilling silence in its wake. It was unsettling. His troops were highly trained, experienced in handling even the most challenging terrains. And yet humans, creatures supposedly unable to match the Xylari in any regard, had somehow neutralized them. The suggestion gnawed at Thrax, like a sliver of doubt he couldn't dislodge. They must have encountered some natural hazard, he muttered to himself, attempting to rationalize the loss. This world is full of unpredictable forces. Humans could not possibly. Another report, General, interrupted Lieutenant Zorak, who had been quietly monitoring the latest transmissions. His voice held a rare hint of tension. From the second reconnaissance unit sent to recover the first, they, too, have gone silent. Thrax's fingers tapped against his armrest as he processed this latest failure. Twice now, teams had vanished without explanation. His gaze flickered to Zorak, who shared his unease but did not voice it. In Xylari tradition, to question one's superiors was not only dishonorable but dangerous. Yet Thrax knew he would have to start questioning his own assumptions. Perhaps these humans are less primitive than we thought, he said slowly, more to himself than to Zorak. Send for Gorin. I want a full analysis of their tactics. Minutes later, Intelligence Officer Gorin strode onto the bridge, his thin, calculating eyes sharp with curiosity. He was the fleet's foremost expert on alien strategies, trained to dissect and unravel the patterns of unfamiliar foes. Thrax watched him closely, hoping for reassurance, yet dreading what Gorin might reveal. General, Gorin began with a faint nod. From the reports, I've begun to discern a pattern. Humans, though technologically inferior, appear to possess an uncanny ability to adapt to their environment. They utilize guerrilla tactics, stealth, ambushes, traps, primitive methods but remarkably effective. Primitive tactics for primitive creatures, Thrax replied dismissively, but the disdain in his voice was less certain than before. Gorin continued, unperturbed, yet their tactics display an understanding of warfare that surpasses simple brute force. They turn the landscape itself into a weapon. It's as if every tree, every hill, Every shadow conceals an unseen threat. They use the world itself as their ally, employing it in ways we do not fully understand. Thrax's jaw tightened. The concept was deeply unsettling. It contradicted the very foundations of Xylery strategy. In their empire, conquest was a precise science, an art refined over millennia. Yet humans fought with an unpredictability that felt almost chaotic, a chaos that unnerved even him. Humans are like the terrain they inhabit, Goran concluded. Wild, resilient, merciless. They strike from the shadows, retreat, then strike again. They fight not only with weapons, but with an unyielding drive to survive, to defend. Thrax felt a cold shiver creep up his spine. He'd known ruthless warriors, seen fearsome battles across the stars. But there was something different here, something raw and elemental about these humans. And yet, he couldn't allow his own unease to fester. It would infect the others, shake the stability of his ranks. "And you think these tactics are sufficient to challenge us?" Thrax asked, his voice harsher than he intended. Goran's gaze was steady. "I believe that if we continue underestimating them, General, we may discover exactly how dangerous they can be." A low murmur of agreement rippled through the bridge as Thrax's officers exchanged uncertain glances. His soldiers had heard the rumors. How humans called Earth a death world, not only for its extreme environments, but because its creatures had evolved to endure relentless hostility. They'd scoffed at the idea, of course, but now those whispers returned with unsettling clarity. Perhaps humans were indeed as merciless as the world they inhabited. But to suggest that humans could outwit the Xylery with mere tactics? Thrax clenched his jaw, unwilling to yield to the creeping unease spreading through his crew. "Enough," he ordered firmly. "We are Xylery, conquerors of 1,000 worlds. If these humans wish to resist us, then they shall face the full might of our empire. Lieutenant Zorak, prepare our forces for a deeper incursion. We will not give them the luxury of shadows and terrain." Yet as he spoke, he felt the doubt solidify in his mind. Humans may be primitive in technology, but they wielded their resourcefulness with a ferocity that rivaled any advanced weapon. Thrax could sense the fear simmering in his men, the way they glanced warily at the planet below, as if it could reach up and strike them from the sky. He was no stranger to fear. It was an old companion, long buried beneath the pride of command, but here, facing these unknown humans, he felt its cold fingers once more. He dismissed Goran with a curt nod, watching the officer leave with measured steps. Thrax returned to his command chair, his gaze fixed on Earth's rotating sphere in the viewfinder. "Primitive," he whispered again, but the word tasted hollow. He could not ignore the gnawing thought that, primitive or not, these humans wielded their world's dangers like a shield and a sword combined. And as he stared down at Earth, he realized that the true enemy was not their weapons or tactics, but the unbreakable will behind them. The mood in the Xylery command ship was tense as General Thrax prepared to lead a larger battalion down to Earth. Despite his public confidence, a shadow of doubt still lingered, gnawing at his resolve. Reports of missing units, ambushes, and inexplicable losses had begun to seep into his mind, muddying his initial certainty. If humanity wished to defy the Xylery, he would crush them himself and make a spectacle of it, showing his forces and himself that these Deathworlders were as weak as their technology suggested. His ship descended to a remote but fortified human military installation nestled between rugged hills and dense forest. Human structures were crude but cleverly hidden, camouflaged within Earth's varied landscape. The terrain was unfavorable, but Thrax's new retreat would be more disastrous for morale than pressing forward. The battalion would clear this base, sending a final message to any who dared resist. "Deploy ground forces," Thrax commanded, scanning the forest below. His soldiers touched down in tight formations, spreading out to surround the base. The quiet was unnerving. Earth's ambient noise pressed in on them, a mix of rustling foliage, unseen creatures, and the faint hum of human machinery. Suddenly, the silence shattered. Explosions erupted from the ground, sharp and deafening. Thrax's soldiers were thrown into disarray as mines and tripwires detonated in quick succession, tearing through their formations. He winced as he watched his soldiers scramble, searching for an invisible enemy. The humans had turned their own terrain into a deadly maze. "Advance with caution," Thrax barked, his voice cut through the confusion, grounding his troops, but he could feel the tension in their movements as they hesitated, casting wary glances at every shadow. And then, from the tree line, came the human soldiers. They struck in coordinated bursts, emerging from camouflage positions, moving with deadly precision. Their weapons flashed, and another line of xylery fell. Thrax's forces fired back, but the humans melted into the foliage, reappearing in unpredictable positions, striking like phantoms before vanishing again. Thrax's pulse quickened. This wasn't the desperate flailing of a weaker species. It was a calculated, merciless strategy. The humans were targeting his officers, dismantling his chain of command piece by piece, with a precision he hadn't thought them capable of. "Lieutenant Zorak, report," he demanded, struggling to keep his voice steady. But Zorak's response was interrupted by the roar of an explosion. A missile hurtling from a hidden launcher tore through the sky, slamming into one of the xylery cruisers hovering above. The ship shuddered, flames engulfing it, before plummeting to the ground in a twisted mass of metal. Thrax felt a pang of shock. He hadn't expected this level of firepower. "They have anti-air capabilities," Goran warned, his tone far graver than Thrax had ever heard. "The humans are using our position against us. We're exposed out here." It dawned on Thrax then, this was not simply a skirmish. It was a trap, set to lure them in, to reveal their vulnerability. A human soldier emerged from the brush, and in his arms, Thrax caught a glimpse of a heavy, shoulder-mounted device. A missile launcher. Thrax's eyes widened as the soldier aimed and fired, and another cruiser erupted in flames, its wreckage crashing into the battalion below. "Pull back to the defensive line," Thrax shouted, but the command was almost lost in the chaos as his soldiers scrambled to regroup. His forces were in shambles, unprepared for the intensity of the humans' attack. The humans weren't merely defending themselves. They were dismantling his forces with ruthless efficiency. The ground battle had devolved into something out of a nightmare. His soldiers were picked off one by one, hunted by human marksmen who seemed to anticipate every move. The terrain, the humans' movements, and the sheer ferocity of their weaponry, it was all becoming too much. Thrax had waded into this battle with supreme confidence, and now he felt it unravel, piece by brutal piece. "Goran," Thrax barked, the icy fingers of fear curling around his voice. "What are we facing here?" Goran's face was pale as he replied, "Humans call this guerrilla warfare, General. It's not about facing the enemy head-on. It's about ambushing, striking when the enemy least expects it, using their own strength against them." Thrax's mind whirled. These tactics, this relentless use of the environment, the psychological pressure, the lethal precision, were nothing like the warfare he knew. He had no choice but to reassess everything he'd thought he understood about these primitives. Another missile tore through the air, narrowly missing the command ship, but the blast wave rocked them and Thrax stumbled. He saw his own fear reflected in Goran's eyes, in the weary stances of the soldiers. For the first time, the xylery, conquerors of countless worlds, were truly afraid. "General, we must retreat," Goran urged, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't match them here. Not like this." Thrax's jaw clenched. The thought of retreat tasted bitter. But as he looked at the carnage, the fallen bodies of his once proud soldiers, he knew there was no other choice. Humans weren't just primitive beings. They were Deathworlders as savage and ruthless as their world. They fought with a resilience that bordered on madness, wielding their environment as both shield and weapon. "Order the retreat," Thrax commanded, his voice hollow. His forces began to pull back, their defeat underscored by the echo of human weapons firing behind them. As the battered remnants of his battalion limped toward the extraction point, Thrax looked back at the smoky remains of the battlefield, Earth's atmosphere still crackling with human defiance. He realized with chilling clarity that this was not a victory denied but a lesson learned. These Deathworlders would never yield, would fight with every ounce of fury until there was nothing left. His mind raced with unanswered questions, each more unnerving than the last. What other horrors had humanity created on this death world, and what other primitive weapons lay waiting in the shadows? The thought lingered as he returned to the ship, unsure if he could ever truly conquer such a foe. The retreat was a haze of desperation and chaos as the Xylari soldiers fought to escape the deadly grip of Earth's terrain. Thrax and his officers huddled in the command ship, the once confident hum of the crew replaced by tense silence and hurried commands. Every alert, every distant explosion shook them, a grim reminder of how humans had turned this world into a weapon. This was no orderly withdrawal. It was survival. "Damage report," Thrax demanded, his voice brittle with the effort to retain authority. Lieutenant Zorak turned from his console, his face pale, eyes hollow. "We've lost over half of the ground forces. 2 cruisers destroyed, 1 heavily damaged. The humans, they're pursuing us, General." Thrax clenched his jaw. Pursued? He couldn't believe it. The Xylari had once been feared across the galaxy, their war machines considered unstoppable. Yet here they were, fleeing before creatures he dismissed as primitive. He forced himself to focus, to avoid meeting the stares of his officers, who looked at him with expressions he recognized too well. Doubt, fear. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting them into the sky. The soldiers had scrambled back in frayed groups, some limping from wounds, others wide-eyed, haunted by the memory of Earth's relentless defenders. As they gained altitude, Thrax saw the vast stretch of forested terrain below, dotted with trails of smoke from the fierce ambushes. It was as if the planet itself pulsed with defiance, a living testament to the humans' unwillingness to submit. Goran approached him, breaking the silence. "General," he said quietly, "I've been studying our data. This human resistance, it's unlike anything we've encountered. They fight with the ferocity that defies logic." Thrax's voice was tight. "Ferocity alone does not win wars, Goran." Goran hesitated, then pressed on. "It's not just ferocity, General. It's their willingness to adapt, to sacrifice. They fight as if this is more than a battle. It's survival. We've never seen this on any other world. They know every inch of their terrain and use it as an extension of themselves." Thrax looked away, his mind flashing back to the moment he'd seen his first cruiser struck down, a symbol of Xylari power destroyed with startling ease. Goran's words struck at the truth he'd been trying to ignore. Humans fought with a unity, a relentlessness that defied the logic of their so-called primitiveness. "And they're not done," Goran continued, his voice tinged with dread. "Our sensors are picking up increased movement on the planet's surface. They're likely coordinating, preparing for another attack. It seems they realize we're retreating." The implication stung Thrax deeply. He was not just retreating from humans. He was retreating from creatures who understood they could force him to run. For the first time in his career, the Xylari general felt true defeat. It wasn't merely physical but psychological. His forces had faced countless foes, but never one so intimately bound to their world, willing to turn every advantage into a weapon, every shadow into a trap. "Set course back to Xylari space," Thrax ordered, trying to suppress the bitterness in his voice. "We'll regroup, evaluate our strategy." But even as he spoke, he wondered if he would ever truly understand these humans, if the Xylari would ever find a way to conquer a people who fought not for glory or dominance, but for existence itself. As they ascended beyond Earth's atmosphere, Thrax gazed at the planet on the screen, a swirl of clouds and seas, deceptively peaceful from afar. The scars of their battle remained hidden from view, yet he felt them, deep and unyielding. He sensed Earth was no mere battlefield. It was a world in constant struggle, a living organism that had shaped its inhabitants into warriors by necessity. "Lieutenant Zorak," he said after a pause, "what are your thoughts?" Zorak's face was shadowed, his confidence drained. "Permission to speak freely, General." Thrax gave a curt nod. I believe we underestimated them in every way, Zorak admitted, a tremor in his voice. They are as much a product of their environment as we are of ours, and their world has shaped them into something we cannot easily overcome. I do not think we are ready for this enemy, General. The admission hit Thrax harder than any human weapon. His officers were trained for loyalty, for confidence. But here was Zorak, his one steady lieutenant, shaken to the core. "Thank you, Lieutenant," Thrax said, his voice hollow. He looked around at his crew, each one worn, haunted by the knowledge that they had been bested. The pride that had once fueled them was now fractured, broken by the reality of a species that fought with every ounce of will, every ounce of rage their world had taught them. As they sped away from Earth, Thrax's mind swirled with questions, doubts that would not fade. Would the Xylari be able to conquer such a force, a people so entangled with their planet that they wielded it as their ultimate weapon? Or had he encountered something that, in its raw tenacity, lay beyond the reach of conquest? In the silence of the bridge, only one thought persisted. Earth was not a world to be subdued. It was a world to be survived. And for the first time, he wondered if the cost of subjugation would outweigh the value of any victory. They fled in silence, chased not by missiles or guns, but by the memory of Earth's relentless defenders. The Xylari would return home bearing not just the scars of a failed campaign, but the seeds of a new, unsettling fear, an understanding that on Earth, survival itself was the deadliest weapon of all.